I'm JP and this is Michael. We're some of the pros that work with College Aid Pro, and I'm going to share my screen. And just tonight's basically all about financial aid and scholarships. Things that are going to help bring the cost of college down. And but as far as College Aid Pro as a whole, um, it's ultimately I say we exist because we recognize that there is a huge problem in our country with the student loan debt, and it's a crisis, and we are trying to help you parents be smarter shoppers when it comes to college. And really, I want you to think of it like that: is shopping for college. We want to figure out how to basically avoid going into an unpayable amount of debt. So, and it is completely possible. So we're going to kind of walk you through some of the tools that are going to help you with that, and just give you broad brushstrokes, some knowledge of that process, if you will. So let me first let Michael say a few words about him, and then I'll take over.
Yeah, thanks, JP. So I'm Michael Korch. I'm in Seattle. I've got twin 19-year-old girls that are sophomores this year in college. One's at Western Washington University, one of our state schools, and her twin is down at the University of Portland, kind of a small Jesuit liberal arts school. They're both environmental studies majors because they're twins. I don't think they have a choice. They have to do the same thing. And they have an older son that's 22. So I'm just a little bit ahead of you, not very far. I found College Aid Pro when my wife and I were racking our brains about how we're going to make all this work. And it's been an incredible resource. And I've really enjoyed working with families from all over the country through all kinds of different journeys. This year has been exceptionally difficult. I feel for the parent that's got one that for the class of 2024 because it's been a tough year with the FAFSA and all the difficulties there. But hopefully, fingers crossed, we're through the worst of that. And October, when the next kind of FAFSA period opens for the class of 2025, it's going to be a better experience. Fingers crossed. So,
Right on, thanks. As far as me, I'm JP. My experience is I was a former director of financial aid at USC. I would be now 22 years ago, I think, over 20 years ago. I helped co-create and usher in the very first Cash for College program that is now still 20 plus years later being used by the California Student Aid Commission. Uh, and Yeah, for 20 plus years, I've been helping families navigate the path to college and helping families not overpay, and just just yeah, keeping us on track, if you will. So a lot of inside experience, if you will. So with that, let's first kind of introduce you to make sure we all are utilizing the same software, if you will, the same tool that we use. Um, I'll put it in the chat here. Um, Hopefully you all got a link to this earlier, but it's College Aid Pros. This is the software we use. If you haven't created an account, you can create a free account. For families of Miramonte, I believe you have received a special code to get the premium access for no additional cost. Miramonte has graciously paid for that for y'all. If you don't have that code, reach out to your counselor. And but otherwise, create the free account with the College Aid Pro site here. So again, we'll reference this a little bit later so you can kind of see how it works. But um, you want to make sure you have that bookmarked on your web browser. Now, just before we get into the nuts and bolts of financial aid, and I can completely nerd out about that topic, and it's a little embarrassing. I just want to pull back for a second and just make sure we understand the basic journey that as a family you guys are going to be going on. Ultimately, you're going to hope that your child is going to find the right college for them, or and right now, if you just cast a wide net, we have over 4,000 plus colleges in America to consider. And that's honestly way too many to reasonably consider. So you got to filter it down. And how do you filter it down? So I describe it as a three funnel process, if you will. That first funnel is going to be filtering schools out based upon academic fit. Do they offer the major that your child wants to study? Is your child going to be with their academic peers? All of that sort of stuff. That's an important factor. Don't send them to a school if it to a particular school if it doesn't offer the degree that they want to study. That should be a no-brainer. But I literally had to have that conversation with a mom today. But you want to run that, make sure the school is an academic fit. The next funnel, and this is what we're really focused on, is the financial fit. And that means we need to know what your budget is. And the College A Pro tool can help you with that. But you want to figure out what your budget is and then find the schools that are an academic fit, run them through this financial fit filter, if you will, and go, which schools are going to fit our budget? And that's not talking about sticker price, it's the net cost, because we're going to maybe get financial aid, we're going to get scholarships, whatever. Which schools are going to fit our budget? And then the final funnel is what I call your child's emotional fit criteria. Their I wants. I want to go to a big school, or I want to go to a small school. I want to go to school close to mom and dad, or I want to go to school as far away as possible from mom and dad, whatever, the I wants. You go through the 4,000 plus colleges and you run through that 3-stage funnel, if you will, you're going to get that list down to probably their top 10 schools. All right. That's what they're aiming for. And then that's what they're going to work on their admission strategy for, as far as getting accepted into those schools. But again, tonight, what we're all focused about is that green middle filter or funnel is the financial fit. So we're going to talk about how financial aid helps you get those schools to fit your budget. So let's just briefly talk about what is financial aid. And I think it's fair to say that it's really a discount off the sticker price of college. You understand this? Colleges artificially inflate their sticker price, and then they use financial aid to recruit students. An example I'd give is, it doesn't cost $60,000 to put your child in a dorm room and then put them in a classroom with a professor. It doesn't cost $60,000. So let's say the school really wants your child to go there and they lower their price down to 40, and they go, hey, look, we can give you financial aid, and you knock $20,000 off. And you're going to be thinking, woohoo, we got a great deal. And to some degree you are. But what you probably don't know is behind the scenes, it might have only really cost $20,000. So they're making a big profit and you're still getting the discount. But that's kind of how financial aid works. It's a way to recruit your child to come to their school. They're going to use it as a way to discount their sticker price. Now, when we talk about financial aid, there's 3 buckets that we're ultimately referring to. The first bucket is grant money. And that's going to be awarded based upon a family's financial need. It's going to be based upon your financial numbers, if you will, the overall financial profile. But and we'll talk, how that works. But the other bucket that we like is scholarships. Scholarships are awarded based upon the student's talent or merit, perhaps. Could be academics, it could be athletics, it could be some other type of performance. So we love grants and we love scholarships. Those 2 buckets are the free money, okay? And those are the ones we really want to emphasize. Those are the ones that we try to figure out how do we get the most of to help bring the sticker price down. The third bucket of financial aid is technically financial assistance. We're not as excited about it because it's not free, and that's going to be loans and work study. All right, and I think we understand loans. You have to borrow and pay it back with interest. Work study, you might not. Not everyone's always familiar with that, but basically, you have to. Student gets a job on campus basically and works to get paid. So, but those are the 3 big buckets, if you will, of financial aid. Now, as far as where do we get this financial aid from? Well, about 45% of it's going to come from the federal government. About 35% comes from the schools themselves. About 9% comes from the state, and about 11% comes from private resources. Now, specifically, let's talk about state sources of financial aid. In California, we have a very robust grant program. And I would argue that I would hope maybe most of us have heard of the Cal Grant. But I would also say that probably the second most common program is the middle class scholarship. So I do want to point out here is that there are more than just those two programs. There are a total of 7 potential programs that California offers. So what I would recommend, and I'll put this in the link in the chats here, is I'm going to suggest you familiarize yourself. Go to this website. It's the California Student Aid Commission website that highlights and explains the different kinds of programs they offer and the application process and all that stuff. But again, that's something your school counselor can help you with too. But I just want you to be aware there is a lot more out there than what we tend to think of in California. We do have a very nice, robust grant program. Now, let's dive into a little bit about the need-based financial aid, the what's going to determine grants and all that stuff, eligibility for grants. And this is what I refer to as the fundamental formula to financial aid. This is the key formula you need to understand. If you understand that, really can understand all the concepts behind this formula, the financial aid process will make so much more sense. And at face value, this probably does, I would think, assume it seems like a pretty simple algebra equation. And again, at face value, it is. You start with the sticker price, cost of attendance, tuition, room and board, miscellaneous fees, incidental fees that they don't charge, but they know you're going to incur to send your child there. That's their sticker price, the cost of attendance. You subtract from that what we call the student aid index. Now, the student aid index is going to be calculated based upon your financial information, the stuff you provide on the applications. Michael will talk a bit more on that later. But it's if I had to boil it down, your SAI, the student aid index, is going to be comprised of your income and assets. That'd be the simplest way I could do it. In fact, if I were to expand on it a little bit more, I'd say students' income and student assets, parent income and parent assets, if I want to get more precise. But those 4 factors are going in to determine your student aid index. And then you subtract that student aid index from the cost of attendance, and that tells us how much you need for financial aid. Now, it is more complicated than this. This literally is a college course. It's a graduate level course. And just this formula is. That student aid index, just to give you an idea how complex it can really get. If I were to print it out, the formula of how it's determined, it's 69 pages long. The rules that go behind what explain what financial aid officers are allowed to do and not do is hundreds and hundreds of pages long. So there's a lot of moving parts behind the scenes. And I think the biggest thing I always want to impress upon families, especially new families on this, is never assume anything when it comes to financial aid. I can't tell you how many times I have parents will ask me, like, well, I just know I make too much and I'll never qualify for financial aid. And how many times those families did qualify for financial aid. They just assumed wrong. Or it's the other way around. They assume that they're going to qualify for a lot of financial aid, and maybe mathematically they do, but the schools they pick don't have the money to give. And they just assumed it would be an affordable school, and it really wasn't. So the fundamental thing I want to make sure you understand is never assume anything with financial aid. Use the College Aid Pro software. You plug in the numbers and you plug in the schools. It takes out all the assumptions. It tells you what's true. Okay, it's going to tell you what's accurate for your situation. So, but understand this is the all overarching driving formula that's affecting how financial aid is going to work. I kind of touched briefly upon this, so I'm going to share with you the stuff when I was the director of financial aid, could never share publicly, but I'll just share with you some of the tips that can literally save you thousands and thousands of dollars here when it comes to determining your SAI. So I told you broad brushstrokes. There's four things in it. Student income, student assets, parent income, parent assets. Right. Let's talk about assets. Student assets. Any asset in a student's name is assessed at a much higher value than if it's in a parent's name. Okay. So an example would be if you've set up a UGMA or UTMA. that's officially going to be a student asset. And whatever that dollar amount is, it's going to be assessed at about 20-25% of its value will go into the SAI calculation. Whereas if it's a parent asset, it is going to be assessed at a net 5.6%, significantly less. Okay. Things you need to be aware of when it comes to, again, which assets do I report and which ones do I not have to report. Well, it's going to somewhat depend on which application, because there are potentially 2 applications you could fill out. But I will say, as a whole, your retirement accounts, 401k, a 403b, a Roth, an IRA, those are not reportable assets in the sense that they're not going to count against you. They won't be counted in the SAI calculation. So make sure that especially on a FAFSA application, you don't report that stuff. 529s, there's been a rule change on that. So, and again, it's going to depend on which application. But when it comes to the 529s, it's no longer considered a student asset. It's considered a parent asset. And again, that's a good thing. I'd rather get assessed at a 5.6% versus a 20 or 25%. Okay. But what if it's the parent? I'm sorry. What if it's the grandparent who set up the 529? You don't have to report it at all. It's not asked on a FAFSA, at least. So things like that. What if you have real estate? I mean, let's first just start about your primary home. If you own it, or maybe the bank owns it, you're paying the mortgage. But if on a FAFSA, you don't have to report it. It'll say just generically real estate, and then in the small little print, it'll say not your primary home. A CSS profile will ask for it, though, admittedly. But if you have a second property, maybe it's a empty land, or maybe it's a rental property, or maybe it's a house you bought for your in-laws, or whatever, that you always have to report. So I think the thing you want to keep in mind is, when reporting your assets, it's the day of, the value is the day of when you're filling out the application. But it's especially things like real estate, or maybe a value of a business. Think of it in the terms of like fire sale price, fire sale value, not the optimal price or value you would get for it. Things like that. That you approach it that way, that's going to significantly help save you, lower your SAI and help save you, hopefully, and keep college down a little bit. Now let's shift gears and talk a little bit about the income. So earlier I said assets, is the value of the day of. Income is always essentially 2 years behind. They look at what we call the prior tax year. So for you guys who are class of 2025, parents of class of 2025, they're going to be asking about your 23 tax returns. Okay. And fundamentally, what's going to go into the income is they're going to look at your AGI, line 11 of your tax return. Now, they don't ask about your expenses. There's no like, hey, how much you pay for your mortgage, how much you pay for your car payment, and they don't factor any of that stuff. They don't. What they instead do is they look at the size of your family, and there's an income protection allowance that's very similar to poverty guidelines. So, like a family of 3, it's around 35,000. That's the protection that they give you, that they don't count. That's like, oh, this is what's allocated for your living expenses. So they'll take your AGI. They do subtract out your taxes paid, line 22, and then they'll subtract out this income protection based upon the size of your family. Again, not much, but that whatever that's left over, that's going in to contribute towards your SAI. Students, if your student has income, they have an income protection up to $9,410. So if they basically earn up to $9,000, none of that's going to affect their part of the SAI calculation. But just remember, it's 2 years behind. It's a prior tax year. All right, I ran through that. That's need-based aid. I'm going to turn it over to my friend and expert, Michael, here to talk about the rest, the merit and everything else.
All right. So merit, we love merit. Merit is great because merit is typically a 4-year award. And let's see, you want me to go out, JP, to my cap? Oh, I can't hear you. You're muted.
How about you cover these next two slides and then let's show my cap.
Okay, cool. I lost, here we go. I got it. Okay, merit. So interesting situation though. We kind of all bundle this under the concept of, or call it financial aid, but the actual kind of the teams that determine merit, the merit award is coming from the Office of Admissions typically. And the financial aid award is typically coming from that kind of Office of Financial Aid. So merit-based awards, as JP talked earlier in the presentation today, it's really about the talent profile of your kiddo. So it can be certainly academic based, based on GPA and test scores. Um, and, and there's lots of other skills that our kids have as well, sports talents, music, performing arts, things like that. So um, different schools, and this kind of whole spectrum of generosity, schools can really vary, and which ones have the deep pockets to and want to prioritize and reward those talent profiles and draw those type of kids into the institution. Um, it's important to understand that uh, for the financial aid side of the house, you have to fill out that FAFSA every year, because as we've seen, especially in the last 3 years with COVID and all the challenges that came from that experience, your financial position for your family, of that income and assets again, can really vary year over year. So the schools and the government really require that assessment every year. And again, coming back to what one of the things JP said, that don't count yourself out for financial aid. It's not as straightforward as reading a tax table, which is kind of, I think, the way we parents are kind of been trained to really look at and think, where's the line? If I make over that line from an income or an asset perspective, I probably won't qualify, right? It's like, there is no line there. What we can do is just make sure that the documentation we provide through these financial aid forms are accurate, and as we've been talking about. And then different schools are going to take that and run it through their secret sauce and their formulas and come up with an assessment and an award based on kind of their business rules. So one important gotcha, and I had a couple of conversations the last few days about this. Again, coming back to some families that are higher income and asset, thinking, we don't think we're going to get anything, so we're not going to there's no reason for us to take time to fill in the FAFSA. Like, well, what else do you get for it? Like, well, you see on the bullet on the screen that some colleges require a FAFSA to be on file in order to qualify for their merit scholarships. So even though those are quote unquote kind of not directly tied together, some schools say, if you're not kind of virtually raising your hand through a FAFSA or a CSS profile saying, if you have dollars available, my family would be interested in those dollars, then the team that's considering, giving a discount and providing dollars through merit, they say, well, they didn't file a FAFSA, so it doesn't look like they're really interested in getting a discount. So we'll just charge them the full sticker price. So don't get caught by that. Some schools more generous, other schools less generous. And it's one of the really the incredible things about my cap is the business rules of the schools are in there. All the scholarships for the schools are in there. So when you fill in the detail, and we'll show in a moment here, of your financial profile of your family and your kiddos' merit, grades and such, and all the school prices will adjust according to that profile. We'll show you kind of a projection of what FAFSA and CSS profile think that you should be able to pay on a yearly basis. And then when you start quote unquote shopping for schools and comparing them, you're gonna, I guarantee you're gonna see some things and go, okay, I totally did not expect that. I thought we were gonna get a really good price from that one, and there's like no discount at all. And this other one, like, wow, it's like it's a third of what we thought it was gonna be. So that's why all the different rules, you can't keep them in your head. You got to use a tool that's going to help you with that. So, what about that situation for if you're a family that you don't qualify for grants and scholarships? if you have a high student aid index, that's going back to that universal formula that we saw earlier, that your student aid index is more than the cost of attendance. Just because a school is $90,000 a year, there's a lot of families that may be able to pay that, but you don't want to pay that, or you, of course, certainly can't pay that. It's really important to learn about. There's this whole group, of the 4,000 schools in the country. There's a really significant group of schools that are value schools. They're priced more affordably. They have really strong academic reputations, and putting on our longer term vision of, like, there is a high ROI for the education investment that you put into that school. It means they produce graduates that are competitive, that are desired by hiring managers based on that school and that major. So that's a great ROI for the dollars you're spending. So another thing, one of my daughters has taken advantage of this, at the one that's at the at the public school here in the state of Washington, is the honors program at Western. Is an incredible program. So a bunch of, especially the larger schools, offer honors programs, and they kind of enable students to get a couple of great things going on in life. One, they kind of build this cohort. You see those same kiddos, and oftentimes it will extend, if not for the 4 years, probably at least the first 2 years of their academic experience. So they're building friendships and relationships through this program. They often get a cross section of, like, some of the best professors. I know my daughter has had geology professors teaching, English professors, foreign language. Like, there's this really interesting cross section of folks that they have to apply even as tenured professors to be a part of the honors program at that school, because it's coveted and they get the best kiddos in there. And it's really an amazing experience. And it makes a bigger school feel more comfortable and more obtainable and accessible, I guess. That's what my daughter shared with me. So it's something to definitely consider if that you have that opportunity with some of the schools you're looking at. We can jump out now, and the kind of the next logical question that we usually ask is, well, how do you find a value school? How do we go about that process? So I'll share my demo account here. Hopefully you can see that. So this is my demo MyCap account. And here's my daughter, Beth. I've gone through the profile and put in information about our finances for this imaginary family and her grades. And we're looking at some schools in kind of, Northern California area where we're based. And we can see how the sticker price is presented, but we also see the adjustment to that based on what the expectations are, as JP was sharing as well. So we kind of have a lower, a medium, and a lower, a medium, and a higher price school. But look at where we started from. It's not necessarily what you expected from a pricing perspective. So quickly starting up at the top, one of the great important derivatives of putting in your profile information is we present here the federal student aid index number. That's that output number that comes from completing the FAFSA form. So the assumption here is that we can pay $42,000 a year for 1 year of school. Many people I talk to, myself included, when we look at that number and go, "Whoa, that's a little high. That's kind of a little more than we were expecting," and that's a normal reaction if you have that when you set up your MyGap as well. The next number here is kind of interesting. It's a range, and it will adjust based on the schools that we have selected and that we're looking at right now. But this institutional student aid index, that's the output number from the CSS profile. And we present it as a range because you may or may not know that some schools that request the CSS profile, these are a small subset of schools. They're kind of on the higher end elite liberal arts schools, the Ivies, the Ivy Plus schools, we call them. Some of those schools actually consider home equity as like a liquid asset. So you're in California, or even me here in Seattle, and have lived in a house for a long time, those housing prices have kind of gone consistently in one direction. And now you're in a home that has a high home equity that may be a part of the thing that's going to be a headwind for you in considering your financial fit. So we'll show you that, and it will be incorporated in those prices. So how do you find a value school? When you get the full version of the MyCap software, you have this wonderful advanced search tool, and you can look at all these different attributes and choose a few to start with. How far is the school from where we're based right now? Maybe we want to just focus on, the state we're in. Now, we're going to cast a little wider net at first. We definitely want a four-year institution. My kiddo is interested in biology, and I really want to know about those schools that the net cost for 1 year for us is going to be $40,000 or a little bit less. And so we'll hit that search button, and it's kind of like Excel. The results are going to be unique based on the profile that I've built in the software. And now, like Excel, we get this data blob delivered, but we can resort the list based on what we're looking for. Like, okay, maybe I want to start with the quality and look at the Forbes ranking first. So those schools that meet all these attributes, what's the top of the list from a Forbes ranking? It's the University of Utah, Salt Lake. Well, what's special about this? Well, they're ranked pretty high in the Forbes ranking nationally. The cost of attendance is about 55, but lo and behold, for my kiddo, they want to award her $17,000 a year, we're projecting, in a scholarship. So making it much more affordable from a net cost and a 4-year net cost perspective. So that's fantastic. Maybe I want to look at it by scholarship. Like, what are the ones that are giving us the biggest scholarship return on investment? Well, here's SPU, Seattle Pacific, in my neck of the woods. Holy Toledo. So $60,000 cost of attendance, but they're suggesting a $35,000 scholarship per year for 4 years, lowering that net cost. We might want to look at that one. That wasn't even on our list. That's a pretty good value possibility there. So this is kind of the magic now. When you put in a little bit of information and the school prices adjust, it's kind of like when if you recall, if you're old enough like me, to remember when Expedia and Travelocity and those things came up, and like, wow, I can find flights that and hotels, and I would have had to make a million phone calls to get the same amount of data. And now it's in front of me and personalized for my family's profile. So, all right, we'll jump back to the presentation here and talk a little bit about applying for financial aid. So you can start to see no two schools are alike. It's you kind of, I've seen before. I was at this place too. The first couple of schools that were kind of on mom and dad's list, we're excited about those. And oh my gosh, there's like no discount for those schools. And then you kind of assume that, like, oh, probably all those schools, it's like, we're probably not going to get any financial aid at all. And you kind of go down the financial aid death spiral then, and are feeling sad about that. But using a tool like this, you can really start to find some of the nuggets and find that there are affordable schools out there. So the FAFSA is, if I were talking to Bill and Melinda Gates, probably separately now since they're not together, I'd tell both of them, like, you have to fill out the FAFSA, because there are really important things you started to hear about filling out, derivative of the FAFSA, beyond just, of course, being eligible for financial aid, making sure you're eligible for those merit scholarships. Your student's going to be eligible for the federal direct student loan, which is the best student loan on the planet. If they need something like that, doesn't matter what your income is, so on and so forth. So deadlines, this is super important. If you or your kiddo are deadline allergic or struggle with deadlines, this is not something you want to miss. Um, it's kind of a definite red line that if financial aid forms are late, if applications are late, that can really kind of cut out that school as an option. Oftentimes financial aid is first come, first serve. So be one of the first in line. Don't miss those deadlines. Those deadlines are communicated not in MyCap, because they're completely fluid and change so regularly, but the schools typically do a pretty dang good job of putting those deadlines on their website. So find the financial aid page. find the application deadline and the financial aid deadline. Sometimes they're on the same day. Financial aid is never before the application deadline. It's usually the same date or a little bit thereafter, but get those, put them in your calendar. Um, Communications and school communications. I know that many kiddos of this generation are email challenged, I like to call it. They're used to their phone, they're texting, they're using other things other than the old-fashioned email like we're used to. I used to make a date with my daughters twice a week to like, okay, we're going to go through your Gmail and see if there's anything. Oh, no, we didn't miss anything. And invariably, we would find one or two emails like, that school needs an additional document. They need, or they're sharing something that they want us to, they're going to be in town for an event. We should go to that. So schools typically, their primary person that they're selling it to and talking with is going to be your student. So be aware of that and make sure that that they have access to an email account that they're checking very regularly, that you're aware of that you guys are teaming up on that together. Okay, next slide. FAFSA. Let's talk a little bit about the FAFSA application. Typically the FAFSA application becomes available on October 1st every year. I'm sure you've been reading and seeing the headlines that the FAFSA has undergone a complete infrastructure rebuild. It's gone from 100 and some questions to 35 or 36. This implementation year, 2024, has been, choose your favorite analogy, a dumpster fire, train wreck, disaster. It's been really difficult. And fingers crossed, it was very delayed. It was very buggy. A lot of those things have been resolved. They're chipping away at it. I'm sure they're throwing all kinds of resources at it. And fingers crossed that for the next session that begins academic period or applying period of October 1st this year for the class of 2025, that it will be solid and we won't have any of those problems yet. We tell, like I said, we tell every family to fill out the FAFSA every year. If you submit the FAFSA, their student will be eligible for $27,000 over 4 years of that loan, the federal direct student loan. If you haven't already, since you can't kind of get started for class of 2025, you can get started by, here you see on the lower part of the slide, create your federal student aid ID. So your student and a parent or a guardian, a mom or dad or a guardian, you each must have your own account. And that login and password, when it doesn't cost anything. When you apply for it, it bounces off a social security system and a couple other systems. It doesn't immediately get presented to you. It oftentimes will take a few days for it to go through the systems and get returned and say, yep, thumbs up, you got it. So don't wait till the last minute when, oh, we got to get into the FAFSA right now, because you need that FSA ID. That's your login and password to get and start the FAFSA application. All right, some FAFSA tips. Can't do a webinar without having a slide of tips. So 2 household families. We work with at College Aid Pro. We support a number of these different types of families, because there is a whole kind of a ball of yarn of that we have to go through in different rules and different strategies that we can apply. So if you fall into one of these areas, that's something to consider in partnering with us, or certainly not sleeping on it and doing some additional kind of research and digging if you're a DIY individual or family. So two household families, divorced and separated. Still pretty straightforward for the most part on the FAFSA side of the house, but on CSS profile side, it's much more rigorous and more detailed. It's not uncommon. There's some flexibility or differences with schools, but typically what we see is that the custodial parent, the parent that has spent more dollars in the previous 12 months, the preceding 12 months, more care and feeding for the student, that person will be the kind of primary application filler for the CSS profile. But the ex-spouse or the spouse of the separation, the other spouse is going to have to fill in a non-custodial application as well, and they're going to have their finances considered for potential contribution for school as well. So that's something to be aware of. And then, of course, if you are divorced from your previous spouse and now you are remarried, that's potentially 4 different sets of finances that the government are going to want to, and the institution will want to learn about and know. So be forewarned is forearmed, and be aware of kind of what your school is expecting. This one's near and dear to my heart. Number 2, the multiple kids in school at the same time with twins. Used to be before 2024 with FAFSA, there essentially was a multiple kids in school at the same time period and discount. It was pretty significant, 35 upwards to 40%. That is no longer the case. So at starting the year 2024 now forward, that discount has gone away. So unfortunately for me, for the appeals that I will be submitting this year for my financial aid, is because the costs for both of my daughters' school have gone up for this next year. That discount has disappeared. Some of the CSS profile schools, though, are continuing to honor that discount. So that, from a strategy perspective, we'd love to partner with you, or as you're using MyCap, you will start to see some of those variances a little bit if you've got multiple kids and you mark that in your profile when they're graduating high school. Parents who are business owners, used to be that before 2024, on the FAFSA, the only businesses that had to be details and valuation that had to be provided is if you had 100 or more employees. So that kind of small business was off the table. CSS Profile has always wanted you to talk about if you're a solopreneur or a small business or a big business, they want all of those details. Starting 2024, now the FAFSA is joining CSS Profile, and they too want to know the valuation of your business, even if you're a sole proprietor. So there are some strategic things to be aware of, and kind of providing the lowest defensible price and such. And that's another area that we work with a lot of business owners to kind of help them through that process and those calculations. Low income families, this is actually a really good story, is that number 1, more families than ever are eligible for Pell Grants, for additional federal funding, as well as the size of the Pell Grants have actually gotten larger. So that's great, continuing to remove obstacles for lower income families to make it, college a reality. Only student going to college. This is a good one. I had a family last week on this one, where in the last year or so, there was a change to 529 accounting on your financial aid forms. It used to be before this year, if you, like me, had 3 kids and they each had 529s, when I would fill out child number 1, the oldest, the financial aid forms, I had to report the value of all 3 of the 529s, even though he's only going to be using one of them. And that was a bummer. That was a negative effect. Well, fortunately now, today and moving forward, you only report the value of the kiddo that is the financial aid form that you're filling out. So that only one 529 balance. And number 6, parents who make significant qualified retirement contributions. Used to be that was realized or kind of seen as income on the financial aid forms, which is a little bit crazy because you don't have access, you're not going to use that for school, you want to use it for retirement. That's been resolved. It's no longer a negative hit, so that's a good. So let's talk briefly about the CSS profile. And what is that? Who asks for that? Well, we said earlier that there's a subset of about 200. It's mostly private schools. It's schools like the Ivy Plus, the Dukes, the Harvards, the Stanfords, and some of the smaller elite liberal arts schools. It's not an or, but an and. You fill out the FAFSA and CSS profile. That application is much more invasive. it's more like filling out a 1040 form than the new FAFSA is frankly pretty straightforward now, especially since it's electronically drawing in the information from your associated tax form, so you don't have to type it all in like we used to. So there's fewer opportunities for typing mistakes. But definitely, again, be honest, don't overshare, don't overestimate. Definitely relates to the information you put in, the market value of your home, the value of your business, and so forth. CSS profile, one of the big differences, they are going to ask about your primary residence, your mortgage, the amount of equity that you have in that home. And some of those schools, again, will treat it as a liquid asset. There are schools like Stanford a few years ago said, we're getting out of that business. We are no longer considering home equity as a liquid asset. And then there's schools like NYU where it's like 100% that is on the table. And just comparing those two schools, if you have a kiddo that's super powered and can even, gain admittance to those really competitive schools, like just the price because of those kind of considerations can be wildly different. So be aware of that. We talked about divorced and separated families, and biological parents will separately and privately submit the CSS profile application. Custodial parent will submitted the FAFSA is also going to submit the CSS profile application with their child. The non-custodial parent will submit a non-custodial CSS profile app. Both of those apps digitally go to the College Board, which is, you may have heard that or know that name because they do the SAT and the SAT and advanced placement. Big company. They also do the CSS profile application. They're going to then deliver both of those application and data sets to the institutions that you mark on there to send it to, and then they will do their kind of proprietary institutional calculations. By the way, when you have your MyCap, you scroll down the screen, we've got links right there. They're also available on our YouTube channel of great line-by-line CSS profile video, kind of how to, as well as the FAFSA, how to do the FAFSA for this year. I mean, we always adjust them, for each year because there are adjustments made every year, but that's another great resource that you can draw on to help you through that process. All right, so next one that something to be aware of, you may be on top of this, or this may be a new item for you, are the different opportunities of when to submit your application. There are these different rounds now, and some schools have up to 4 of these rounds I've seen. So there's early decision, early action, and regular decision. These are kind of the typical ones that we see now. So we've been talking about, applying to college. Now we're going to start taking a step and thinking about when to apply. So admissions counselors, they do their best to make sure the admissions process is as simple as possible. We know that this decision in particular can be very complex and confusing. So let's, kind of review these different options. So early decision, the students who apply early decision submit their applications earliest, and by definition, way before the regular deadline. And likewise, they typically will get there, be informed of their admissions decision, first as well. Typically January, February. So you may be submitting these in early November potentially, and then learning about them in January. Now, something that's very unique about early decision is it's a binding decision, which means that any student that applies and is admitted to a school through early decision is expected to enroll. So that has implications, this application typically requires some type of signed form that indicates like this intention. And if a student is admitted in early decision, he or she is expected to withdraw all the other applications and submit the matriculation upon receiving the offer. So in College A Pro's opinion, it's critical to research thoroughly in advance and discuss with your student, that this school should be their first, kind of number one choice. And parents should be absolutely clear and to know the likely financial aid and merit scholarship results will be for this school. So this is when, if you don't use a tool, if you don't use MyCap, you're kind of at the mercy of the school. You're not going to have clarity on potentially, like, is this a good offer, an average offer, a bad offer? Like, you would get that projection information in MyCap. And because you can only apply to one school early decision, you cannot compare. There's not other awards to really compare it against. So you got to have higher confidence in that. So you can appeal a financial aid award through early decision, but again, you have limited comparison opportunity to review competitive offers. So that one can be fraught, and you got to have high confidence in that. So one other challenging thing about this situation is that admissions data from schools over the last few years are starting more and more to show that schools are admitting larger percentages of their freshman class through the early decision round. Diabolical scheme or luck of the draw or surprise, somewhere in between there, I think, because maybe they're getting more dollars from each family because there's less comparison opportunity. I don't know. But just, be aware of the situation. Use the tool to understand. If you want to have a consultation to talk about school, we have great expertise on a bunch of the schools, so we can potentially help. Going to the middle, early action. Students who apply early action, they're going to submit their apps before the regular decision. They're going to get informed of their decisions soon thereafter. These decisions are not binding. So students are not, they're not binding committed to these early action schools. They still have until the ultimate decision day. Maybe it's May 1st, maybe it's a little bit earlier, depending on the school. So they have more time to consider. They can apply to other schools through that early action round. They can still appeal awards. Now, there is this concept, and we're starting to see it more, is that early action folks may be deferred even to the regular decision time frame. Policies kind of vary between schools, so be aware of that. Still the majority of students who apply nowadays to given institutions do that through the regular decision. The application submission deadlines vary. There's not a standard, like, regular decision is always on, March 31 or something like that. It varies by the school. So again, look at the calendars on each of those school websites. Most students have until May 1st to either accept or decline an offer. Each student is permitted to submit a matriculation fee or a fee waiver to an institution so that they can hold that spot. That's kind of the next step typically. So again, look at those school websites, understand the definition and the rules for each of these rounds, and understand what the calendar is for those. All right, just about done. You guys have been really good hanging with us here. So looking a little bit down the road, a word about appeals. So we're dealing with, I think this week I'm dealing with fewer appeals. I don't know about you, JP, but I know the 2 weeks prior to that, it was like the appeals channel here on cable television. It was appeals 24/7. And that's good. I mean, it's great that more and more families are learning about it or trying to, appeal those dollars and get some more dollars for their family. So it's good. It's good. What is this appeals process? So after your student has been admitted, you get a financial aid award letter. And it's a presentation of, this is what, like JP shared with us, this is the federal government aid, potential state aid, institution aid, work study and loans. This is the package that we have for you. There are times that, it's not a great offer. You're using a tool like MyCap and you have different expectations, and there's a different history from the institution being more generous, perhaps. So this is an opportunity to not negotiating. It's really kind of like having a conversation, and it's about appealing, the financial aid side of the house or the merit, or maybe even both potentially. And it's about um, using data, and it's about using, sharing your family's personal story. And again, looking in the rearview mirror in the last 3 or 4 years, like there are families I know I've talked with that got, have lost a parent or lost a family member because of COVID, or had long COVID. And so work has been difficult. So income is down. Like there are these extenuating circumstances that when you have this 2 year look back and a snapshot of your income, stuff happens in the 2 years that, uh, that happens going forward when you finally submit the financial aid form. So there is a codified formal process to say, hey, that's no longer my financial situation. Look at your school's website. Oftentimes it's very well defined that they'll have an appeal process. Here's the form you fill out, or here's who you need to speak with, or here's the process that you have to go through. So we help lots of families with that. If that's something, an area where we could potentially help you, let us know. Okay. Well, what's important next steps is that don't just set this, additional knowledge um, on the side table and forget about it, but keep the train going. Let us know how we can support you. You have a really strong resource, and if you've ever looked at our website, we have ton of free resources, blog posts. We have our YouTube channel. We actually have a boot camp that's coming up here on the 21st. JP is going to be presenting among several other luminaries, financial aid, scholarship, and admissions luminaries, and it's going to be really good. We're going to cover the waterfront from admissions and financial aid and your school list, and over the space of a few days, a couple of webinars, there's just tons of knowledge that will be shared. So take advantage of that.
Yeah, 100% agree. Boot camp is amazing. I know there's certain organizations that charge big bucks to do similar boot camps, and the irony is they're using our software, and we're doing it for free. We're doing it for free. And I was working with a family yesterday who went to one of those other kind of boot camps that paid big bucks for, and we're like, we got no help, nothing specific. Um, they tended, they watched our free webinars, and were like, oh my gosh, we learned so much more. They did an hour with me, and night and day difference, like as far as the information they got, and practical actionable advice that they got. So um the the if you're in the chats, I highly encourage you to read this recent article from the New York Times. It should be a shareable version of it, so even if you don't have access to New York Times or subscription to New York Times, you should be able to access it. It's written from the former senior advisor to the Department of Ed, and it's a very accurate assessment of what we see happening with colleges. And I think the analogy, the thing he pointed out is, you have to understand, colleges literally pay millions of dollars to consultants to figure out how to best recruit your child and get the most money out of you at the same time. And that colleges are playing a game of chess while you're playing checkers. Um, so we're hoping, we know that if you use the MyCap software, that can significantly help you level the playing field. Okay. So just again, it comes back to being a smarter shopper. And so if you think of that process, that journey I shared at the beginning, and you got 4,000 some schools, use your school counselors. They're here to help you with, help them the academic fit, help them figure out the emotional fit stuff too. Come up with strategies for admission. we can help you. That software MyCap will help you with the financial fit. Like, that's our bread and butter. Let us help you with that. Let's help make sure you're making smart financial choices, a good ROE, return on education, if you will, with the choices you make. So anyway, I think we got all the questions answered. Michael, any last parting words from you?
No, thank you so much for carving time out on a school night, on a weekday, when you could be watching Seinfeld or something super valuable and useful. But no, really, thank you for making time and making this a priority. I hope you've got a couple of nuggets out of this that will help you in your journey, and call on us if we can help, please.
Have a good night, everybody.